Hey guys, welcome back. So this video is actually something we've been getting quite a few requests for. People have messaged us. They want to know exactly how they need to do this. So I thought, you know what? Let's just cut to it. Let's do a video on it. It's going to be a little long, but I think it's going to be worth it in the end. Now, a lot of this stuff is out there already, but it's kind of like in pieces and here and there, and everybody does it a little different. And this is just going to be the easier way is for us to go ahead and just do a whole video on this. And that is starting up the engine on the engine stand. So we're actually gonna do beginning to end wiring, fuel, and starting the engine. So bear with us, it's gonna be a bit of a long one, but it will be worth it. Stay tuned, see if you can stick around to the end. We'll see if we can get this bad boy fired up, all right? So without further ado, let's kick it off. All right, so first thing first, we need to tackle the wire harness. It's probably one of the most daunting tasks anybody ever wants to take on here, but it has to be done. Now, if you take a look, we do have a rat's nest of wires here. From the factory, this thing is god-awful, and it's, honestly, I'm gonna say it, it is run the worst way possible. I hate the way they come from factory. These are the truck harnesses, and what they actually do is, so the ECU actually sits off to the driver's side fender, and then you have this big bulk of wire, which is actually the backbone of this wire harness here. It runs right across the top of the intake, and it's awful. So all of our builds have been done similar. That we try to minimize this wire harness as much as possible. So this build is actually going to be running a non-electric TH350. So we actually can drop a lot of the wire harness, especially for the transmission controller. So it's actually almost this entire leg of the harness is gone. And I mean, we dropped quite a few wires just doing the standalone startup. Now, that being said, there are two ways to go about this. First, you can actually get away with not rewiring the harness whatsoever. You can actually get yourself this factory harness, and you can get yourself a factory fuse box. If when you pulled your harness, you went ahead and grabbed the fuse box, you're in luck. You just go ahead and plug it into the back here, and then you actually have to just find your trigger wires for ignition on and ignition start, and you're good to go. So, well, we don't do this. This looks ugly. We don't do this. It's just not gonna happen. It's just not gonna happen, all right? So, what we do instead is we delume the wire harness. A lot of people freak out at the idea of this. There's a lot of information online. LT1swap.com, guys, check it out. They have everything you need to know on how to do these harnesses. Beginning to end, tons of pictures, all the pinouts. I mean, I print them out, so I have everything with me, but actually I have every single block connector on there, and I know every pin goes to. And this is really important for me because I actually unpin everything. I actually unpin the two block connectors, which most people will delume their harness, and they'll wrap a little bit of tape around each wire that they're gonna keep, just to kind of keep it going in the same fashion so they don't mess up the wire harness, which is okay, it works. I rerun everything. So what I end up doing is actually depinning everything out of the harness because I have the map to put it back together. I know how to put it back together. Done a few of these, you get used to it. Start seeing the connectors and you know what they go to. Right here, that's an oil pressure sensor. Don't even have to label it. But I did. I went ahead and labeled all these so I know where to go. Cam position. Big thing you should do. Label all your connectors before you delume this. Especially if you've never done one before, you're gonna wanna do it. So everything's been labeled. Everything that I'm keeping has been labeled, let's put it that way. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna delume this. Everything. We're gonna depin everything we don't need. We're also gonna depin everything we're using because all I'm gonna do is keep the connectors. And then we are gonna go back to the motor with everything in place, intake on there, everything in place, and we're gonna plug in every single sensor. We're gonna plug in every single controller. Everything needs to get plugged in, and then we're gonna run the backbone of the harness. We're gonna run all the wires down to the back. We're gonna run them cleanly, neatly down the back, and then we're gonna loom them back together. That'd be the first step. we're gonna go ahead, get this wire harness deloomed. We're gonna go ahead and get the wires ran. You guys don't have to do that part. That's up to your build and your specifically how you wanna do it and how intricate you wanna get into it. We just don't like the ugly wire harnesses, so we're not gonna run the ugly wire harnesses. So let's go ahead, rip this thing apart, get them all labeled, get everything ready, and then we're gonna get everything ready to be reloomed after we finish rerunning those wires because we want it to look good. Even though this engine is going into a burnout car that we're probably gonna blow up, and there's a good chance we'll burn up part of the harness or ruin it. So, I mean, it's for you guys. We're doing it for you guys. We're here to educate and help you guys out and also put on a show for you. So if I ruin that, okay, we'll deal with it, right? So let's go ahead and get to work on this. It's gonna be a long video, gonna be a long project. Hopefully we can start this thing at the end of it. So let's get working. All right, guys, so we're gonna go ahead and get into the wire harness portion of this. So like I said, we're gonna be using some resources here, such as LT1swap.com, and they have phenomenal resources and phenomenal information. Like they have all the information you're gonna need on having to do these swaps. We get a lot of questions asked about how we do these wire harnesses and anything around like swapping from an 80E, or doing a 60 to 80E, or going for non-electric transmission. All this stuff. This is where we go. This is where we get our information from. So check it out. It is lt1swap.com. I'll go ahead and bring it up here now. So this is what it's going to look like. Yeah, I know. It looks like everybody who's ever made a website when they were about 13 years old. But trust me, it does have good information on here. This guy actually does do PCM programming. You can send him your PCM and he'll do like VATS delete and everything for like 75 bucks. It's pretty cheap. If you're not looking to buy like HP tuners or something like that and you just want to have VATS deleted, some of the check engine codes turned off, check it out. Pretty good stuff. All right, so here we go. It's a wire harness info up here. And he also has the PCM programming tab there. All right, most of these harnesses we're dealing with are going to be the same, 1999 to 2007 Vortec. All right. This is the main. This is going to be the main wire harness we're going to be dealing with. This is the one that we deal with all the time, but they do have everything else on here: 92, 97, LT1, the 57s. Because originally the site was about doing the 350 swaps, and as it got into the LSs, he went ahead and started going into that as well. But go down here, 97, 2000. This is what we're dealing with right now, and we're going to go ahead and look at 99 to 02. So 03 to 07 is going to be drive-by-wire. 99 to 02 is mostly going to be drive-by cable. That's what we're going to be working with on this one. So this is what we're going to click on here. Do note below this, they actually do have, these are the connectors that need to go to the car. Not all of these are going to be used in every single situation, but these are your average ones. So pin 33, 42, 58, 19 and 75, and 20 and 57 from the blue connector. And those are going to be things like the TCC brake switch, the fan 1 control, OBD2, pink is going to be your key on, orange is going to be your 12-volt permanent battery to keep memory, and then you have your red connector here as well. These are the going to be the wires that are going to be coming off of the PCM going to the chassis. These are the ones that are going to talk to the chassis, the ones that are going to give information like check engine light, vehicle speed, fan controls, engine speed signal, which is your TAC, and fuel pump controls. So this is all the stuff that you're going to need to have go to the vehicle specifically to interact with key on, to interact with the dash cluster and everything. He does have some nice pics here of actually tearing down the harness and like which ones are which injectors, which ones are coils. Like, he's going to go ahead and label everything here for you. So it's good information, really good overall information. So we're going to jump into 9902. Now, do note there are some highlighted sections in here, and these are very important. So anything highlighted in blue are wires that are needed and have to go to an external connection for standalone. Meaning now not every wire, every pin is going to be what it was for before. Sometimes we're repurposing these. There's one of them that's going to be repurposed to run the fan, the second electric fan. So these are just ones that are needed. These are ones you are not going to delete, and you're going to use them as an external source. So anything marked in yellow are wires that are not needed. So this is for like a green swap. So this is considered for something that we call standalone, meaning that like with the BMW back here,
we're using a GM computer to interface with a completely foreign vehicle that this engine and PCM combo were never meant to talk with in the first place. That's why this is standalone, meaning that I can run it on an engine stand with no other interference from anything else. It's not going to talk to anything. It's not going to do anything. It's going to run the engine. They're considering that you're not going to connect it to anything else, that the vehicle you're putting it in either is an old vehicle that does not have all these options on, or that it has its own body control module that's going to be controlling its own things. So if you're swapping a 5.3 to a 6.0 in a Silverado, then you're not going to do any of this. You're actually just going to plug it in and then plug it into the body control module and let it talk to that. In this case, these are the wires we're going to disconnect because we're not using any of them. All right, so if we go back here, you'll see anything marked in yellow is removed. We do not need it. There is one other highlighted area you're going to have to keep an eye out for, are the red ones. What that means is the red are for non-electronic transmissions. So if you're using a Turbo 350, Turbo 400, a 700R4, anything like that, you don't need these. These are going to be for electronic controlled transmissions, i.e. the 4L80E, 4L60E, anything in between or above. So if you are like, we're going to be here, we're going to be running a TH350, we don't need any of this, so we're actually going to be deleting out of this and probably a little more. So if we go through and we start looking at yellows, we're going to see we have requested torque signal. We don't need that. The entire wire is going to be deleted all the way up until the plug. So from the block connector on the PCM all the way to the plug for the actual sensor, all the way deleted. And here in red, we have transmission fluid pressure switch B and C. We don't need those because we are not running electronic control transmission. It does not talk back and forth to the PCM. They're unnecessary, unneeded. We're deleting EGR. We don't need that where we're going, so we're deleting that. Now, if you're running EGR, you might need that, and you might need the computer to talk back to the ECU, so you might have to figure that into your build. We're also going to be removing the low O2 sensors. So the low O2 sensors are post-CAT, and since we're not running CATs on this build specifically, we're not using them. You may need these if you are going to run CATs on your build. So be aware that some of these are up to your specific build on whether you're removing them or not. Once we come down here, TCC brake switch. See, this one is typically needed because the torque converter needs to know when you're pressing the brake pedal to make sure that the torque converter is not engaged into lockup at that point. So if you're cruising at highway speeds and your torque converter is in lockup, you're getting almost 1-to-1 with your engine to transmission. And if you hit your brake and it didn't unlock, you would be fighting the momentum of the torque converter and the transmission to try to stop the vehicle. Instead, it notices that it disengages and it goes into a much lower ratio, which is the slip of the actual torque converter. So if you do not have electronic torque, or if you do not have a torque converter with electronic lockup, then you don't need to worry about this. Otherwise you do. Even if you have a non-electric transmission, if you have a lockup converter, you will need to use this wire. So there's other things in here they're going to say that they're going to be reusing wires, or what the wire can be used for, or may need to be completely deleted altogether. So they will actually go through, it starts out with the blue connector, and then it's going to come down here to the red connector. And as you can see, there's actually quite a bit of wires being deleted. This is what I'm talking about, where you're actually not deleting it, you're keeping it, but you're repurposing it. So you're going to use the connector that's on the other end of this, which is HVAC recirculating door control. You're actually going to just use that wire as a relay control for your fan number 2. But as you see, we delete quite a bit. I mean, there's a lot already, quite a bit not used, but we delete quite a bit. So anything in yellows and red are getting deleted, except for the ones that are repurposed for fans or any other controls like that. And you see, it really severely cuts down the number of wires. It's almost about cutting about half of the used wires completely out of this harness, and that's why it's going to look a lot cleaner and a lot easier to actually manage this once we're done. So this is the resource we're going to use. Check them out, lt1swap.com. You get about everything you need here. Now that we have the information we need, we can go ahead and de-loom this harness and get it all set up for a standalone setup.
All right, so we're gonna go ahead and start working on getting this harness torn down and get it all ready for the standalone setup. So the first thing, first and foremost, get the old loom off. We need to get that old crappy convolute loom off, and for no other reason than to make it look a lot more menacing than it really needs to be. So as you can see, there's a lot of loom. So I mean, it's just nasty looking loom. I mean, just look at the pile here we have. And then, I mean, the harness just looks like it weighs about 10 times less than it did. Now that we got it down, and we will have to remove some more of this, especially this tape on the backbone here, because we're gonna have to remove enough that we can get a lot of these wires out of there. We're gonna be de-pinning out of the main 2 blocks here. And then we're gonna have you pulling all those unused wires, which is roughly about half of the wires that you see there, are just gonna go away. So we're gonna be removing a bunch of harnesses we didn't need. Now, this is something you don't have to do. This is gonna be a lot more in depth than some people are gonna need. But for my case, this is what I want, because I can't stand a messy harness. Even though the application might not be for a show car or anything, it's still nice to have it looking nice, neat, and clean. So the biggest problem is, from the dealership, GM put the ECU over on the fender and then just ran this big bulk of harness right over the top of the intake here, and then draped right down to the coils and the injectors, both sides here. Then throttle body, you have your IAC stepper motor, you have your throttle body. You also have like a mass airflow sensor up here, an alternator plug over here, and coolant temp on the side. And then it would just run all the way down the back, and then it would go to the trans and the O2 sensor. See, it's really ugly. So what we're actually gonna do is run everything from the back up. And when we come up with the main backbone of the harness, we're gonna come up to here, and we're gonna run underneath for the throttle body and the IAC stepper motor, as well as the mass airflow sensor, which will be right about here, and alternator and the coolant temp sensor. So anything up front is actually gonna just run underneath. We'll be running down here for underneath the intake forward, and it's actually just a pretty small amount of wires for that. Then we'll be coming up on each side for the 4 injectors and the coil pack, same thing on the other side. And then a couple harnesses coming off for the map sensor here, cam position sensor here, and then knock sensors. Then we'll run one of them down the side and over here onto the side for the crank position sensor right here. We're not gonna be running an oil level sensor, so that's actually just gonna get capped. Other than that, we'll just have to have a couple harnesses come down for the O2 sensors, which will be about here and over here. And then other than that, we're not doing electronic control transmission, so there's nothing else. And that's why, as I say, this harness is actually going to be a lot smaller than it started out. So we're going to be undoing all of this, and we're going to be unpinning every pin from the block connector here. We're going to mark them down. A little bit of white masking tape, or whatever color you want really. A little bit of masking tape and a fine tip marker. And we're just going to mark down the block color that it came from and the pin number it came off of. That way we don't have to sit there and try to work really hard to find them. We do have a wire diagram for this whole thing, but it's just going to make it way easier. We're not going to worry about the ones that we're depinning and removing. We're more so only concerned about the ones that we're keeping. So we're going to label those so that's easy to repin them later. But the main reason we're removing them all is because we're going to connect every single harness to where it goes on the motor, and then we're just going to run those wires back. That way we actually have our own laid out harness. We don't have to try to route everything in. We can loom it a lot easier that way, and then we can repin it onto the ECU block connectors after we're finished. So let's go ahead. We're gonna go ahead and get this stuff depinned. We're gonna remove out the portions of the harness we don't need, and then we're gonna go ahead and get this all put back together. So let's go.
One eternity later.
All right, so there's what we removed. Wowzers. That's a lot of wires, not gonna lie. And here's what we're left with. I know it looks like a mess. There's a reason for that. It is. So don't get too scared. This is actually very manageable. At this point, we could just find our connectors, connect them to the engine, wherever they need to go, and then just kind of loom it back in whatever direction we want. But we want to go a little step further than that, and we actually want to depin a lot of these. And when we do that, we're actually going to be grabbing some tape and some markers and marking which ones we keep falling off of. And then we're going to connect the connectors and then run them. This is for two reasons. One, it gives us a chance to actually get a straight run from wherever they're at back to where we want them to go without having to try to worry about this big hunk of wires in the middle. So we're just working one sensor at a time. Two, because we can depin them here, we actually have some slip loom, which is right here. We have some split loom also, but with the slip loom, we can actually do about 1/4 inch wire bundles, which is about enough to do every single one of these. I'd say we can do around about 6 or 8 wires in a bundle typically with those. And that gives us a chance to actually slip them on from the pinned end on the end, instead of having to take off the plugs on the end, which we do not want to do, because then we're cutting the wires and then soldering and splicing back on. Makes it a lot harder. But we can do all the individual plugs with the slip loom, and then we'll use a split loom for the backbone. And it's gonna make it look a lot cleaner. So it'll give us a chance to be able to do that. So stay tuned for the second video on this series. I'm hoping we can do it in three videos. So this one we went ahead and tackled going through and doing your pregame and making sure that you know what wires need to go, what wires need to stay, and kind of make a game plan for what your needs are for this harness. Then we went through and showed you the resources we got, especially with LT1swap.com, and then we went ahead and just tore this wire harness down. So in the next video, we're gonna go ahead and get this wire harness put on the engine and start looming everything back, and then we're gonna go ahead and split up the 12 volt positive wires, so that way they're ready for the 3-wire conversion. And hopefully once we get that finished, get the fuel system on this engine, we can then do a startup video. So hopefully the last video will be doing a first fire up on the engine stand. So hopefully only 2 more videos. We'll see. I'm gonna try to make it 2 more videos, guys. All right, don't forget, like, comment, subscribe. Also, hit that bell. Thanks for watching.